Alrighty, let's get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle. I work on the One Mind Cyber Guide project housed at UC Irvine, and I will be your moderator for this flash talk. I do apologize for not having my camera on. There are two puppies running around, kind of a distraction. So to respect these talks, I decided to keep my camera off. But we will start with our flash talks with the one titled Development and Piloting of a Chatbot for Teens. So Elsa, if you'd like to share your screen and take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Can I get a thumbs up if this looks okay? Can see it? Perfect. Thank you so much, guys. So hi, I am Elsa Friis. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and the head of clinical R&D at an early stage startup called Alongside. And our mission at Alongside is to curb the youth mental health crisis with an accessible and equitable resource. And all the work I'm presenting today couldn't have been possible without my amazing clinical R&D team pictured here and all of our teen users. And our disclosure is this research was conducted by our internal team, and Alongside is a venture capital funded startup. So at Alongside, we're a low-cost tier 1 mental health support delivered exclusively by schools. This allows us to increase accessibility and to be an on-ramp for students who do need additional support. And our development process started last April in 2022. And we started out with student interviews and stakeholder interviews. We then developed our minimally viable product and completed interviews with teens on our minimally viable product. In August of 2022, we launched our initial pilot trial with our beta product with 26 schools across the country. We then did a mid-pilot partner evaluation in January, which led to the development of our version 1, which we launched in March of 2023. So looking at our student and stakeholder interviews, two main key themes came up for our students. One, that it needed to be confidential, and that we were providing personalized and tailored support for day-to-day challenges. For our stakeholders, we're really interested in our 24/7 access. So this is something that's available to students outside of school hours, and that it had to be easy to implement. Our student user feedback on our MVP helped us identify and prioritize our key features. One of the key tensions that we identified was this balance between the student desire for confidentiality and the school desire for ensuring student safety and making sure that they could help students who needed more support. So these interviews led to our beta version of the app, which started with 6 transdiagnostic single session chat flows that were all developed by therapists, so no AI. This is pre-GTP. Had a journal, calming and educational videos, a counselor meeting request, and the ability to share our summary cards or chat summary cards with the counselor. Of course, we monitored for crisis. At our 6-month beta evaluation, we found that our chat flow completion rate varied quite a bit, from 22 to 76%. The top 3 issues that students chatted about were school, friends, and family. 75% of teens found it was helpful. And surprisingly, around 27.5% of the time, students decided to actually share that summary of their chat with their school counselor. However, only a very, very small percentage, 1.4% of students, reached out to a counselor via a meeting request. Some of our key implementation factors were needing to have multiple stakeholder buy-in. This is really important when working with schools, that we look at the district, school, and counselor level buy-in. We needed to modify some of our crisis notifications. We found our highest uptake or student usage was when there was weekly reminders by principals. And we found a very low level of organic sharing from student to student of the app. So what this led to is the development of our version 1, where we threw out all of our transdiagnostic chats and listened to our users and created issue-specific chats. So we went from 6 transdiagnostic to, in March 2023, we launched 55 issue-specific chats for students, and we currently have around 92 issue-specific chats in our app. We are also using AI now to match users to our chat modules. And a lot has changed in the last year since we founded this company. And so we are starting to integrate generative AI in less than 2% of our messages that we send to students. Everything else is written by a licensed clinician. So as I mentioned, we completely restructured our chat to really focus on those day-to-day challenges that students are dealing with. So we cover these 38 issues. And our most common issue, as I mentioned before, is friendship. So just thinking about friendships, we have around 10 different chats that address a variety of friendship conflict issues. And then finally, our last key outcome here was making sure that we're designing for both of our end users, which are our counselors and school administrators and our students that we're serving. So we have data dashboards, and we now also have a counselor portal that allows them to more easily monitor students with severe issues. And finally, our next steps, we just had 15 high school interns join us yesterday. They're pinging me like crazy as I speak on Slack. And so they are doing co-creation with us for 8 weeks and extensive user feedback, and we're looking to do a pilot trial this fall. And that's it. Okay. Thank you, guys.
I had a question for you, technically two. So the first one is, did you notice a specific, I guess, grade level that was particularly using the app more, since this was developed for K-12, correct? So that was the first question. And the second one was, on the chats with certain topics, were there more popular ones that you all have noticed?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are in middle and high schools, and I will say that our 8th graders are by far the most active. And I would also say that our issues depend on student grade. And so middle school, we tend to see a lot more friendship drama issues, conflict resolution, questions about relationships. And then in our high school students, we still see friendships, a little bit less comments around like the drama and navigating friendship groups and more like one-on-one friendship conflict. And then we tend to see more significant issues around anxiety and depression, low mood in our high school students.
Thank you. Again, thank you again for that amazing flash talk. It was actually very interesting for me, since I have a sibling that is in that age demographic. So I found a lot of benefiting things. So thank you again. We will be moving on to the next flash talk, which is titled "A Fully Automated 8-Week Text Messaging Intervention to Support Self-Management of Depression and Anxiety, User Engagement and Feedback from a Field Trip."
Great. Can you see my screen? So I'm Rachel Kornfield. I'm an assistant professor at Northwestern in the Center for Behavioral Intervention Technologies, presenting on behalf of my co-authors. And I'll talk about our automated 8-week text messaging intervention, which we tested in a field trial. And the issue we're trying to address here, of course, is unmet mental health needs. And as we know, digital mental health interventions can be effective, but many of them to this point have had low uptake and high attrition. And so what we wanted to do was work with end users, specifically those who are not currently engaged in treatment, to really understand what tools would look like that would meet their needs outside of a treatment context. And so we developed an automated text messaging program called Small Steps SMS, working with about 50 non-treatment engaged individuals with depression and anxiety. And what we found is that they wanted us to take advantage of the ways they're already routinely using technology, and in particular, that meant text messaging, which has very high reach and high levels of accessibility. And so what we did was build a program that really emphasizes diversity of content. That's something that users really wanted, was to trial a bunch of different strategies they can use for self-management. So we drew from cognitive behavioral therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, and positive psychology. We supported 11 psychological strategies overall, as well as a bunch of different ways of interacting with the program. So not just giving suggestions and psychoeducation, but also asking reflection questions, allowing people to write and receive messages with their peers and receiving peer stories. The program also allows for active personalization, in the sense of choosing which strategies to start with or when to end them, setting your schedule, and then passive personalization in the form of reinforcement learning algorithms that deliver more of the types of content that people engage with the most. So we ran a field trial of the full-length 8-week intervention. We were really interested in understanding how would people engage with this over 8 whole weeks, as well as how usable did they find it and what kind of remaining problems might they identify that we can continue to work on. So we conducted feedback interviews at weeks 4 and 8, and then we looked at message logs to understand engagement. And we're particularly interested in whether they responded back to these interactive dialogues. So on a given day, did they respond at least one time? So what we found is that we did achieve high and sustained levels of engagement. So users responded on about 70% of study days. And encouragingly, 85% of our participants were still engaging in the 8th and final week of the study. Even though this was not a trial focused on clinical outcomes, we did look at pre to post changes, and we saw a significant reduction in depression, although not anxiety. So that's the PHQ-9. And as far as usability, we had some encouraging results. The system usability scale, we had an average score of 77, which is a pretty good assessment of overall usability of the system. We also used a measure usability, satisfaction, and ease of use, or the use measure, which allowed us to really understand which are the kind of dimensions of usability that are driving these ratings. And we found that people found the system particularly easy to learn to use, probably because they're very familiar with text messaging already, and it had very high ease of use. Satisfaction and usefulness were a little bit lower. So as far as the qualitative findings, we did find that it did lose a little bit of novelty over time. And so people responded that sometimes they wanted a bit more personalized responsive support, particularly when they wrote a free text message and got kind of a generic or canned response of, thank you for sharing, things along those lines. So possible directions include integrating coaching or possibly generative AI. We got some feedback that the message volume and length were too high. So we're working on streamlining content. People have very idiosyncratic schedules, which are challenging but important to accommodate these windows of free time that really vary from person to person. And then we did find that there was some disengagement, largely not driven by not liking the content or not finding it helpful, but just becoming very busy and feeling overwhelmed. So this does present a challenge, and we need to think about how we can better accommodate that, both through our content and maybe setting expectations when people start the program. So this does seem to be an acceptable and usable solution over 8 weeks. I mentioned a number of possible avenues for refinement, including personalized responses, supporting users who are overwhelmed by demands of daily living. And our next steps will include testing the efficacy of this intervention in an RCT. So thank you very much.
Among the people that were involved in your study, did the participants ever try to seek traditional forms of clinical care?
So for this study, we recruited non-treatment engaged individuals who also were not planning to seek treatment over the trial timeframe. So they said, I'm not going to seek out psychotherapy in the next 8 weeks. So whether they actually did, I'm not sure, but we were kind of trying to focus on non-treatment engaged and those who don't have an intention of treatment seeking.
Thank you, Rachel, for your flash talk. We will be moving on to the next one, titled Co-Design of the Raise Mobile Health App for and with Caregivers of Youth in Juvenile Hall.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Can you see this okay? Great. So my name is Elizabeth McBride, and I'm the study coordinator for Project Raise, and I'll be talking about how we co-designed a mobile health intervention with caregivers whose teens are in juvenile hall. So on any given day, there are over 20,000 youth in residential custody in the US, including in secure facilities like juvenile hall. And between 40 to 70% of these youth meet criteria for a mental health disorder, and about 50% for a substance use disorder, compared with just 10 to 20% of the general adolescent population. So as you can tell, it's imperative that they receive services, but only about 1 in 3 youth actually access the behavioral health services while they're in custody, and it isn't much different once they've been released into the community. So when youth re-enter the community after detention, caregivers play an important role in helping their teens access treatment, but they often face significant barriers to getting their youth into care. Navigating the health and legal systems can be incredibly stressful, and these systems often don't support the caregivers adequately. So helping caregivers manage their own stress will equip them better to navigate the complicated systems and get their youth into treatment. So one empirically supported approach to addressing this parenting stress is in-person mindfulness-based stress reduction interventions. Studies have shown that these interventions reduce the stress for parents and also reduce the teen's substance use, even though the teens aren't participating in the intervention themselves. But these in-person interventions are often not accessible for caregivers of justice-involved youth, and that's where technology can address this gap. Technology-based interventions are promising low-cost options to reach underserved populations. However, it's crucial that these technology-based interventions are developed alongside the populations they're meant to serve to ensure that they are acceptable and relevant for their intended users. So co-design processes should be collaborative and center the expertise and lived experience of the intended users. So this is the backbone of our approach to designing Raise, an app designed with and for caregivers of teens in custody to help reduce parenting stress. We recruited 6 caregivers of justice-involved youth to help participate in reducing this parenting stress. The caregivers each participated in 9 meetings, and over the course of these meetings, we focused on building trust and sharing goals in the project, and then reviewing the empirically supported mindfulness-based intervention, and then adjusting the intervention for relevance and app adaptation. So how did it go? None of the co-designers had prior experience developing apps, and confidence that the project would achieve its goals rose from 83% before development began to 100% during the process. Upon reviewing the transcripts from these meetings, qualitative coding confirmed that these meetings were highly collaborative, and common themes emphasized by the co-designers included the importance of cultural relevance for both design and content, addressing trauma related to systems involvement, and incorporating folks' lived experience within the content. So for example, the co-designers emphasize the importance of showing diverse images of people on the app and including diverse voices in the audio narrations. They helped tailor the content to address coping with the stress of being separated from their teens by the legal system, and also for preparing for them to come home. So once the app had been mostly built out, we recruited 6 additional caregivers of justice-involved youth to join our co-designers in testing out the app. Each participant had access to the app for 3 months and participated in a focus group once a month throughout these 3 months. Through these focus groups, we gained valuable feedback that helped us revise the content, identify and troubleshoot technical bugs, and adjust app features to caregiver requests. So what did we end up with? Raise is a web-based mobile app that provides users with 8 weeks of mindfulness-based content with a new lesson available each week. The content is interactive, including material to read, audio meditations to listen to, videos to watch, and prompts for reflection to write about, and practices to engage in mindfulness during everyday life. Next, we'll be launching a pilot trial with 60 caregivers of justice-involved youth. Some will be randomly assigned to access the RAISE app, while others will be assigned to receive the Standard of Care, which is an informational pamphlet about the justice system. And over 6 months, we'll assess key outcomes like parenting stress levels and youth treatment access post their release. So I'm happy to answer any questions that come up, and we would like to thank the caregivers who participated, our partners in the legal system, and our funder, NIDA. Thank you.
So after the pilot study is launched, will this app be available to download on app stores, or is this app more so tailored to be involved with the clinician in mind? And then there's like a paywall, etc.
Yeah, that's a great question. So this app is mobile web-based, so it's actually not on the App Store. It's like a website, so anybody can access it on a computer or a phone, regardless of having a smartphone. And it is free, so there's no cost for any users. And I believe after the pilot trial, we will continue to work on the app and adjust it according to caregiver feedback, and hope that it will be more widely accessible.
We had a comment in our chat saying that they love the co-design aspect. I wanted to also ask about the comment mentioned the co-design aspect. Since you are based in San Fran, are the people that you recruited to help develop that based in San Fran as well?
Yeah, I believe most of them are in California, in the Bay Area, and also like we have some like in other parts of the state. But with the pilot trial, it will be accessible to any caregivers in all of the country.
Got it. Well, thank you again for sharing your presentation. Next, we'll be moving on to the next flash talk, which is titled Evaluating Access and Use of a Digital Safety Planning Tool for Suicide Prevention.
Hello, everyone. My name is Shilpa Hampel. I work with the mobile mental health apps team at the National Center for PTSD at the VA Palo Alto. And today I'm going to talk about a suicide prevention tool in one of our apps known as the safety planning module. So firstly, some disclosures. I have no commercial incentives to disclose, and this presentation does not represent the views of the VA or US government. So suicide is certainly a global public health concern. At least 700,000 people die by suicide each year, and certain groups are disproportionately affected, such as military personnel, veterans, people with mental health conditions, and some racial ethnic minorities. And these groups also face barriers to healthcare and consequently have lower rates of healthcare utilization, which raises questions about the accessibility of suicide prevention interventions. So there are several interventions for suicide prevention. However, most interventions are typically administered by a provider in clinical settings. And one example is the evidence-based safety planning intervention, which involves a provider working with a patient to come up with a prioritized step-by-step list of warning signs, coping strategies, and resources to use during a suicidal crisis. The plan is documented on a paper form, such as the one shown here, that the patient can then take home with them and access during a crisis. Consider it like a paper plan in your pocket. And unlike most suicide interventions, the safety planning intervention has the potential to be flexible and adaptable in its delivery. And so in order to increase access to this suicide prevention tool, we developed a digital safety plan module housed within our free, private, publicly available flagship self-care app known as PTSD Coach. And since a tool like this didn't exist at that time, it was important to seek feedback from various stakeholders at different phases of development. And so the team took a multimodal approach to evaluating early versions of the digital safety plan. We interviewed subject matter experts, clinicians, and older veterans before the module was launched in April of 2020. Once it was launched, anonymous users of the PTSD Coach app were also prompted in the app to complete a brief online survey. Anonymous usage data from the app was also collected and analyzed. And finally, we conducted user experience interviews with 16 veterans and conducted a rapid qualitative analysis on that. So we certainly obtained a lot of data while we were developing out this module, and also after it launched. And this informed development during that phase, as well as future plans for development. But in the interest of time today, I will briefly summarize some key facilitators and barriers and data points to access and use that emerged across these data sources. So firstly, the survey showed that most people discovered the digital safety plan on their own or stumbled across it by accident, which makes sense. I mean, this is a self-care app, and also it is this app is curated for military veterans for the most part, who often don't seek help for any mental health challenges. About a quarter of them learned about the module from a VA provider or staff member. We do have some efforts to implement and disseminate apps across VAs across the nation. And then in addition, most users overall were satisfied with the module. The anonymous usage data showed that on average, users completed 3.3 steps out of the 6 steps, with 18% completing all the steps. And this graph also shows that most users only completed 2 steps total. However, we exercise caution when interpreting these results. Some steps have multiple parts that are all require inputs for the step to be marked as complete. For example, as shown here, a user needs to input at least one contact and one place, location, for step 3 to be marked as complete. And through the qualitative interviews, we discovered that some users define completion of a step differently. For example, for some folks, like inputting one contact was enough, like sufficed for step 3. So that was interesting and certainly something we're considering in future versions. Also, the data suggests that step 3 might be a stuck point for some users, possibly due to privacy concerns over importing contacts or inputting like personal information, even though the app is in fact private and secure. Then the qualitative data showed that subject matter experts, providers, and users aligned on several facilitators and barriers to access and use. The module is easy to use and information can be inputted flexibly. The instructions at each step are clear and thorough, as shown. Here's an example at step 3, what the instructions look like. People liked the guided step-by-step format, which allows for autonomy, not requiring assistance from a provider, for example, to create the safety plan. The content inspired new thoughts and ideas around safety planning, and the module is accessible compared to a paper version. In terms of barriers, the module can be hard to find within PTSD Coach. Some features like the I button shown here at the top, which provides additional information and resources, are not always intuitive. People requested more open text options. And there were also concerns about accessing the plan during crisis. For example, at that time, we didn't have an option to view a full plan in one place. You'd have to go into each step individually. So that's something we have since fixed since then. Finally, assistance from a provider or a peer may be needed for some users who were maybe having difficulty identifying content to include in a step, or for folks that are maybe less tech savvy. So in summary, overall users were mostly satisfied and found the module easy to use and accessible. However, assistance may be needed in some cases and possibly additional in-app support at common stuck points. In conclusion, the digital safety plan is a promising alternative to the paper version, especially for populations with low mental health service utilization. And this data has actually laid the groundwork for a new standalone safety plan app, which is shown here, which will be released in the next month or two. Instead of kind of building out the safety plan module, we realized it made sense for people to have access to an app just focused on suicide prevention. So that was the goal here. And then finally, future research on this new standalone app will focus on app engagement, ways to address some of those barriers I mentioned, and app effectiveness for suicide prevention. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for sharing. I was curious on two things. One, was there any important predictors or ways that you have been able to increase completion rates? And the second was, is there ability to edit the safety plan or revise the safety plan over time?
Yeah, so both great questions. I'll address the first. So as I mentioned, certainly doing some engagement research would be a good next step in identifying some of those predictors that increase engagement. I think through this project, we certainly identified some of the possible barriers and stuck points to completing a safety plan. For example, some issues with like lack of clarity on what needs to be included. These are certain things that normally a provider would be able to explain in a clinical setting. And so it might not be as clear on how to completely fill out a safety plan on your own. And so making sure that that step-by-step guidance is in fact clear and thorough for all types of populations and users. So we haven't yet identified specific predictors for engagement. We have, as I mentioned, some insight, but still more work to do there. And then, I think one of the things that people really appreciated with a self-care version, a digital version, was the flexible approach. People did cite some moments of where it was maybe a little bit overwhelming for them to fill this out. For example, the first step in the plan is identifying your own personal warning signs for suicidal thoughts. And that can be a lot for someone to think about and to kind of process that and identify content to put in that step. And so people appreciated being able to kind of set the app down and come back to it at a later time, or skip a step and come back. Whereas in a clinical setting, you might feel a little bit more forced. I don't know if forced is the right word, but to really complete your plan with your provider in one sitting. So I hope that answers your question. I think that was something people actually liked about a self-care version.
Nice. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned in your presentation that quite a few users stumbled upon it, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So before you all decide to make it into just a standalone app, are you planning on maybe moving that feature on a more present interface, or moving it up so that they could easily find it more easily? It could just easily be more accessible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so as I showed, it is hidden in the lateral menu, which does make it difficult to find for some folks. And so that's something that we are discussing. I think the original plan was to create this module and have it be an optional tool across all of our apps. We have many we have around like 16, I think, apps for various mental health issues and challenges. And so I think overall the feedback being that it is difficult to find, and also a lot of people who deal with suicidal thoughts might not necessarily be dealing with PTSD. So having it in PTSD Coach or having it in other apps might not be as helpful. So overall, that's why we decided to focus our attention and efforts on a standalone suicide prevention app. In terms of it'll stay in PTSD Coach. I don't know how much of our resources we would invest in trying to make it more accessible within PTSD Coach. I think we'll focus our attention on the standalone app.
Is there an expected launch date? You said fall, correct?
We expected it actually to launch by August. So it will be free and publicly available to anybody in the App Store very soon, possibly next month, but most likely by August.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. And thank you for your flash talk.
Thank you.
We will be moving on to our last one. The last flash talk is titled Co-creating, Testing, and Scaling a Digital Mental Health Web App for LGBTQ+ Adolescents.
Sorry, trying to share my screen with you. Just give me 1 second. Okay, let me try this again. Can you see it now? Can you give me a thumbs up if you can? Or just say something. Can't see faces.
Yes.
Great, thank you. So my name is Emma Brolman-Senecal, and I am from Hope Lab. And Hope Lab is a foundation that's focused on supporting the mental health and well-being of LGBTQ+ and BIPOC youth through tech-enabled solutions. And I'm going to be talking about partnerships that we developed to create, test, and scale IME, which is a web app designed for LGBTQ+ young people. Unfortunately, as a result of stigma and mistreatment from society, LGBTQ young people face greater mental health risks, including higher risks of depression and suicidality relative to their straight and cisgendered peers. And these disparities are even more pronounced for LGBTQ+ youth of color who face multiple overlapping forms of discrimination. But there's very few freely accessible digital tools out there designed to support LGBTQ+ young people, particularly those designed with the needs of youth of color in mind. So to fill this gap, Hope Lab teamed with a few other mission-aligned organizations, one of which is Centerlink, which is a national association of LGBTQ+ centers, and another of which is It Gets Better Project, which is a nonprofit devoted to uplifting, empowering, and connecting LGBTQ+ youth. And together we created IME, which is a web app for LGBTQ+ youth to explore and affirm their identities. And the creation of IME really started by looking at the empirical evidence base and talking to academic experts in the field of LGBTQ+ mental health, and exploring what do we know about what works, mainly from the in-person intervention literature to support the mental health of these young people. And through this review, we identified 3 key ingredients that we wanted to include in IME. One was content aimed at identity affirmation. The second was content aimed at teaching skills for coping with stigma and discrimination. And the third was providing a sense of being part of a larger and supportive community. So with these three key ingredients in mind, we tested how to adapt this content, mainly from in-person interventions to a digital format. And we did this over the course of time in partnership with over 350 young people across the country, most of whom were youth of color, to make sure the tools spoke to their needs and lived experiences. And in the early stages of this project, this partnership looked like mocking up rough prototypes of IME, like the ones that you see on the right of the screen, and just testing what visuals resonate with young people, what language they use to describe their experiences, what do they want to see more and less of. And in the later stages of development, it looked like thinking about how do they want to interact with, for example, identity affirming or coping exercises, which you can see on the left of the screen. And in much later stages of product development, this partnership involved asking LGBTQ+ young people to contribute their stories and their artwork to the tool. So all of the artwork that you see here on this slide was created by young LGBTQ+ artists and included in IME. We then tested IME in partnership with Dr. Jose Baumeister at UPenn, and we found in a randomized control trial that teens randomly assigned to receive IME reported significantly greater improvements in coping skills and greater confidence in their coping abilities relative to teens assigned to a resourceless control group. And if you want to learn more, you can link to our JMIR paper. So with these positive findings in hand, we started experimenting with approaches to getting the tool out and into the hands of LGBTQ young people, from A/B tests on Instagram, like the ones you see on the screen, to marketing done by partners. And what we found in these tests is that direct sources like emails, texting campaigns, word of mouth, like word of mouth at conferences, accounted for the majority of visitors to the site. But referrals from partner organizations like the ones that you see on the right were also really important to bringing users into the tool, which really highlights the importance of partnerships kind of from the very beginning of tool creation, tool testing, all the way to tool distribution. And since we launched a year ago, we've had over 60,000 visitors to the site and counting, and it's freely available. Anybody can visit it. And if you want to connect to the work, learn more, you can go to the site or connect in these other ways pictured on the screen. And I'm going to stop sharing so I can see you all, but happy to take questions.
I was wondering if you can link your JMIR paper.
Yeah, for sure.
Find it on the website and I couldn't find it.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Ruben. I'm curious, could you describe a little bit more of the identity affirmations and kind of the strategy behind that? Yeah, that's my question.
Yeah, so the tool was aimed at both affirming a wide range of sexual and gender minority identities and allowing for exploration of identities. So mainly that was, maybe I'll share my screen and share IME itself, because I think that's the easiest way to show you what that looks like. Let me navigate my way back to you. Okay, I will. So if you go to IME, you'll see within each, there's 4 guides, stress, queerness, stigma, and gender. And both queerness and gender in particular really focus on exploring and affirming different LGBTQ+ identities. So if I were to go to the queerness guide, for example, and go to an activity like reflect on my current identity, there'd be like interactive activities that would allow you in a guided way to explore your identity. If you're kind of so this was designed for 13 to 19-year-olds. So a lot of them are newer to the process of identity exploration. So just giving a concept of what we mean by identity, and leading them through these guided types of exercises. There's another that's like, build your pronouns, or build a wardrobe for yourself. So it's fairly light and fun, because that's what we heard in testing that the teens wanted, but it does focus on affirming a wide range of identities, and also saying that you don't have to identify in any certain way. You don't have to put yourself in a box. Does that help answer the question?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Sure.
We had a question in the chat, and this will probably be our last question. Jacob asks, what are your plans to keep this relevant as time goes on?
Yeah, so Hopefully created the tool. We're not the owners of the tool. It's owned by Centerlink, which is a national association of LGBTQ+ centers. And they also operate other digital tools like QChat Space, which is a space where LGBTQ+ teens can connect with other teens in a moderated forum for support. And so we'll work alongside them to update the tool over time, but it's really in their hands where it goes, whether or not they want to survey teens. For example, in user testing, we found a lot of teens said, like, we want a relationships module. And I think that that's a wonderful idea, but it's up to them at this point whether they have the bandwidth and resources to continue to develop that in partnership with us helping with the co-creation.
Thank you again, Emma, for your flash talk. It is now 9:53, so we are 2 minutes early, which is great for you all, because you all will have more time for your break. Thank you all again for joining this flash talk. We will be convening again at 10:10 for the AMA.